What's happening?
What's up, everybody?
Good evening.
He's all. Good evening. Hi. I'm your guest tonight.
I am.
I'm going to speak very quietly.
Well, if I keep drinking beers, I'm definitely not going to be doing that.
Hey, guys. Welcome back to Mike on a Platter. We have with us Mike Dahlgren, and Mike is here to talk to us about, well, let's just say he's a very, 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 very well read guy.
Very.
Okay? Like very, very.
Like very?
Like insane, dude.
Like how
this
very?
This guy is so well read, it drives me crazy. I just want to hear more.
Yeah, he walked up with a bag full of books.
You know why I'm so well read? I was born in 1967 in January, and there was nothing to do back then. And one of the only things that there was available for to spend time with was to read books. And my mom never didn't have a book. She was always reading something.
Okay.
And as I grew up, I just saw that it was a normal thing to do to read. And we used to take a lot of trips up to Mammoth. And the road to Mammoth when you're a kid is interminable.
Yes, it's forever.
It takes forever. And we would stop off at these little stores. And I stopped off at this one gas station store, and it had some paperbacks that were popular at the time. And one of them was The Lord of the Rings, the prequel, The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And I bought The Hobbit. It was the first book I ever read, and I think I was 11 years old at the time. And I started reading The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and I got hooked on fantasy and science fiction.
Cool.
When I was a kid, and I was just always read books. I was never the brightest kid, but after you read a few thousand books, you start to become smarter.
Well, and on that note, Mike has read so many books. And by the way, Mike Dahlgren, a guy I've known forever, he's also an accomplished diver, spear fisherman. He is officially known as, and I don't give a shit what anybody else out there says, okay? Mike Dahlgren is the Yellowtail Whisperer. Everybody else can fuck off because that title does not apply to you. It applies to this guy right here, and that is no joke. But more than that, he is very well read, and he always talks about all the books that he's read. And I said, God, we got to get this guy in here. He has so much to say. He's such a treasure trove of information, and we really wanted to bring him in tonight, Mike, and thank you for being on Mike on a Platter.
I'm having a great time, and I enjoyed the invitation, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
So before we get into our subject, let's just do our little crack here in 3, 2, 1. Oh, yes.
I love it already.
Lost Coast. Yeah, baby.
To the end of the coronavirus.
Yes, to the end of the coronavirus. So, Mike, you got your shots, right?
I do. I have one in each arm.
No. Okay, cool. You know, I'm so tired of my family complaining about me getting a shot that it may actually break down and get one.
They're giving them away, and they're giving away free stuff. If you do it right, you can get on the same day. You can get like free French fries.
Nice. Here's your pint of ice cream. Pint for a pint.
Yeah. It's like it's my birthday.
It's like you train a dog.
Yeah. Well,
Sit. Here's your treat.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there you go.
Well, you know what? That worked.
Yeah, that worked.
It
a
works
lot of
great.
people were lined up.
All right. Well, shoot. Okay. Well, I'm about to line up. You know what? I'm not doing it for me anymore. I'm doing it for them. I want my family to feel like, okay, we want to see you. Come on. All right.
They're giving away annual hunting licenses in Maine. Can you imagine getting a free hunting? Because I haven't bought my license yet.
See, but what about now? Here's the tinfoil hat question. What about all the nanobots that are supposed to be in these shots? Is that a real thing?
No. According to Melinda Gates, she's never heard Bill say anything about it. I've never heard him say anything about it.
Well, at this point, you know what? I'm ready to just join the winning team because we're so fucked.
According to
so
Melinda Gates, it's not possible. We don't have the technology yet.
Oh, that's not what I've heard. But anyways, but I don't want to get too far off topic. So Mike's here to talk about a book that I think is so important. I'm gonna read it. And Mike has got me so fascinated about it, and George so fascinated about it. We had to bring him in to talk about it.
Now this book.
So why don't you show him the book?
This book is a slog. Can we see it?
Let's hold it up to this camera right here where it's nice and big. Guns, Germs, and Steel by
Jared Diamond.
Jared Diamond, yes.
What's it about?
Okay. Oh, funny you should ask. It's funny you should ask.
This book caused a kerfuffle when it first came
Make sure
out.
you speak up to the mic so everybody can hear your awesome words.
Oh, we can hear you.
What
Okay.
Mr. Diamond attempted to do is write a history of humanity, which encompasses the last roughly 13,000 years. And most, if
Not an easy thing to do, I
no,
take it.
No, not at all. No historian had ever tried to do anything remotely like it. And
Okay.
But he's not a historian.
Jared Diamond is not a historian. He's a scientist.
But he's a scientist, and what I like about that is that he gathered from multiple disciplines
Correct.
to come up with some of his conclusions and draw some of his hypotheses.
Exactly. He's an anthropologist and an archaeologist, not necessarily a historian. And I'm going to try my best to explain this book the way that I remember it, and I haven't read it in a few years, but it made an impression on me, and I'm going to try my best
It's okay. I've never read it, so.
to try and give everyone listening an indication of what it's all about. And if you want to pick this book up and read it, it'll take you a little while. I think it took me about a year
Okay.
to read the whole thing. If you look at it, you can see that it is full of
Okay,
very, very
take a look at
small
this.
Thicker
words.
than a Snicker.
It's, what is it,
Tiny, tiny words.
how many pages
And
does
look
this
at how
book have in it?
thick this book
It's like
is.
a Harry Potter book.
Okay,
It's-
let's see.
I don't know if it's, but
Okay, let's skip the indexes. Damn, dude, what'd you do? Pee on this book?
it got some
Okay,
water-
so
it
there's
got
like
some water
500
damage.
pages
One of the
on,
Yellow
this,
Tails
on
read it.
this ditty, okay?
13,000 years.
Yeah,
And
Yellowtail.
what it attempts to do is explain why some human societies have more than others. The first
On what levels? What do you mean by more than others? Explain that one.
Okay,
just
well,
briefly.
The book starts out with a chapter called Yali's Question. Right?
Okay.
Yali was a friend of his. Jared Diamond was sent to Papua New Guinea.
Yep.
A lot of people don't know what Papua New Guinea is. It's actually an island complex, which is almost the size of a continent. It's enormous, and it's got an amazing amount of human history attached to it for, I think, at least 100,000 years. There's
Wow,
been
okay.
people living in and around, and this book attempts to explain why the agricultural explosion of the relatively recent history of Homo sapiens, which started around 13,000 years ago, roughly the reason is climate change. The climate changed enough for plants that hadn't existed abundantly before to take hold in certain parts of the world, and for the humans that lived around those plants to be able to cultivate them.
Okay.
And I always blank on the word that you need to explain this
word?
process.
Agriculture?
No. it's-
Domesticate?
Domesticate, yes.
Domesticate.
Thank you very much.
Hey! Okay, we got a winner. Thank you,
The
Jorge.
domestication of human species, of plant and animal species.
Okay.
So the question that starts the book out, it was Yali's question, and he lived in Papua New Guinea, and there was, something happened at the end of World War II, right? There was a lot of civilizations, the Pacific Islanders, and they had never met white people, and they were basically still living a hunter-gatherer existence. They had some plants that were that they could cultivate and use for food, yams. In Papua New Guinea, mostly yams.
No, the yams were in Africa. Papua New Guinea had
we
they
go.
harvested this plant that came almost from a palm tree, very low in protein and abundant, but it took a lot of work to kind of prep it, right?
Okay,
in order for it to be a
It was
meal.
a
It was super labor intensive.
labor-intensive and inefficient food source.
Yep.
Is that,
What they
is that
had.
manioc?
I think so.
Might have been.
I can't remember the name of the super.
Might have been manioc. I think some of these foods are actually toxic until they learn how to.
Yeah.
They leach them or cook them or
Now,
whatever.
when I say that I'm going to talk about this book, what I'm going to be doing is talking about a half a dozen books about this same subject that I've read, and they kind of mesh into one another.
Okay.
The thing about the yams is that they did all of these agricultural products did in fact, grow up indigenously in one place, but then humans took them and moved them around
And
the
they got
world.
dispersed,
And
right? They
were-
got
and then
disseminated.
And that's the point of the whole book. This was Yali's question. They lived in the islands of Papua New Guinea, and then at the end of World War II, these planes came in. They called them cargo planes, and they turned into gods. Did you read about the cargo gods?
No, yeah. So the people of Papua New Guinea, they would refer to goods as cargo. So the question that the guy had asked was, why do white people or why do Americans have more cargo than us?
Why do they have spam? Why do
Yeah.
they have transistor radios and we
Yeah.
don't?
Yeah.
Right? And Jared Diamond thought to himself, that's a great question. Why exactly do we have all this stuff
Yeah.
and everybody else have no stuff? And it's an extremely complex answer.
Yeah, because when Jared was there, I mean, these people were still, wearing their they weren't fully clothed, right? They were still using bow and arrows.
They're still in
they,
their
they weren't.
skivvies.
Yeah, they weren't super advanced.
Well,
They were almost naked.
truth be told, they were eating each other.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
No, you can hear 'em. We can hear you fine.
Okay, all right. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure
Why
we
does-
can hear him.
Believe it or not, there was a societal and religious desire to go and hunt down your enemies and kill them and eat them. There wasn't a
Cannibalism.
Yeah. There wasn't a tremendous amount of protein on these islands, and the populations would grow, and there would be periodic famine. And so, one way to mitigate the starvation was to go and kill your enemies and bring them back and cook them and eat them.
That's so crazy.
If only everybody knew about the Fertile Crest.
The Fertile Crescent.
Yeah.
Yes. That would take a little time to disperse throughout the world. I'm trying to remember where to start with this particular story, and the answer basically works like this. There is a current belief in the world today, especially in the Western world, that the answer to this question is simple. And it is, in fact, a racist answer. The reason that white people were able to dominate the world, subjugate all of the people, and enslave them, and take over most of the world, is because white people are smarter and basically a better civilization, better genetic stock, more human.
So this is the fallacy. This is
Correct.
the misconception
This
that is
is
going
the-
around.
the-
And actually, when Vince was in here, he was trying to show his little charts. Remember when he was in that one time? He's trying to show his little chart showing the IQ levels in different
Oh,
countries
God.
and IQ tests. And I got something on IQ tests. We'll get to it in a minute. But go ahead and please
There
finish.
were all sorts of pseudoscientific studies that came up, like phrenology, the bumps on the head, the shape of the human skull. These were all designed to try and buffer the belief that Western civilization and white people specifically and in particular,
And Asians, right?
no,
Or just white
Western
specifically?
Western Europeans, white people,
Okay.
were better. The English, specifically, tried to come up with this. Not so much the Scandinavians, but the English were big fans of this.
Bloody Brits.
Well, that's just the way they see it. They wanted everybody else to see it that way. And Mr. Diamond wasn't buying it. And so he started studying, and he came up with scientific evidence, historical evidence, which denounces that theory. And his theory goes like this, and it makes a hell of a lot more sense than white people are just better. Yeah, because that...
Finally, okay.
That doesn't
so
make any
moment
sense.
Of, moment of truth here. Preach on, brother.
Yeah. Basically, it works like this. The reason, in a nutshell, that the Spanish and the Portuguese and later on the English were able to discover North America and South America and then basically destroy those civilizations, subjugate them,
Utterly dominate.
and enslave the people were primarily for three different reasons, and it's not only these three reasons. It's much more.
But these are at the top of the reason list.
With the guns, germs, and
Which
steel.
is okay. Yes. Okay. All right.
Right. I think that even more importantly than that was the previous historical explanation. It goes back even further. Why were they able to come up with the ideas for guns? Why did they develop the germs? And how did they come up with steel? Those historical reasons work like this. The reason that they were able to do this was because they came from the largest continent on the planet,
Right.
which is Eurasia. It's all connected. There is no difference between Europe and Asia. There isn't two continents there.
It's a latitude continuity.
They're not separated
That's very, very long.
so much by mountains. There are mountain passes and animals can get, but it is one landmass. It also happens to be the landmass that has the highest mountain ranges in the world. And because it has very, very high mountains and very, very low places and more area in between, it's able to evolve more species than other parts of the world. Because you need different latitudes, different concentrations of sun, right?
Right.
Now, these plants didn't exist. The plants that I'm referring to specifically are the major grains. And if we had like a list of them, which exists in the book, we don't have time to dig through it.
That's okay. The
and
generals
check them
are
out.
fine.
We can just remember.
A couple of them were like wheat and barley.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Maize. Right.
Millet.
Millet. Your
There's-
standard 13 grains or 21 grains or whatever they are that,
One
that
of them
you
is
usually find.
the different types of rice,
Rices,
right?
yeah.
But when you look at just a regular wheat, I think all over the planet there's either 22 or 28 different varieties of wheat, which are grasses, right? The grasses took over at the end of the last ice age. All of the glaciers melted back, and it left all this incredibly fertile ground, which is now getting sun, and all the trees have been taken away. And so the grasses started to move in. And then when all the grasses moved in, the animals changed, and because they had more food. And so where there was no food for humans to go out and collect on the side of a mountain, there used to be only an ice sheet. A few hundred years later, the people could look up at the mountains, and there were fields of wheat growing on the hills.
Okay.
A lot of people think this is where the concept of religion came from. They didn't know where the wheat came from, but all they knew is they could go up at a certain time of the year and hit it with sticks, and the seeds would fall on the ground, and there was so much of it, they could just grab bags and bags of it and take it back to their campsite and beat on it and throw it up into the air and get rid of the chaff, and they could end up with seeds that they could grind up and mix with water and turn into bread. And they could store them for large amounts of time, which you can't do with animals. Animals, you have a certain amount of animals, and so if you have a herd of antelope, let's say, living in an area, once you eat all the antelope, the people start to die. So you can only have 2.1 persons per square mile. But once you start farming and you start growing these grains and you store the grains and the wintertime rolls along, you start making bread. You supplement your diet with carbohydrates and calories from the
harvest.
From the harvest,
so to speak, yeah.
Exactly. And you still have animals, then you can start coming up with more people. That's where you get civilizations. If you've only got 2.1 people per square mile, it's difficult to build a city. But once you start coming up with 200 or 300 people or 500 people per square mile and put them in cities, and they start multiplying, and they're able to come up with more farmland, and then you start talking about the political dynamic of where do we go to get more farmland? Because once you grow crops in an area for 50 years, that land is no longer capable of supporting wheat. It's become fallow, and it doesn't work to grow wheat anymore.
The soil doesn't have any more
So
nutrients
you have
in it.
to go out and find areas where nobody's ever planted before. And that might be in some other hunter-gatherer's area. And they're not going to like that. So you have to kill the hunter-gatherers, and then you take their land and you turn it into more places where you can grow crops.
Okay.
Grow those crops and develop your society. That's why civilizations tend to spread out and destroy the simpler ones around them. Because if you don't do that, another civilization over the next mountain range is going to come and do the same thing to you. There's a dynamic that starts, right? You had all these giant forests that used to exist in North Africa, right? But crazy thing about forests is it's raw materials that other people can use to chop down and build siege engines in order to destroy you. Right?
Right.
So if you live in an area and you've got all this giant farmland, another civilization can come and you run from them and you hide, but they have all these forests. So they chop down the trees, use them to build siege engines and come and destroy you. And these people started to realize that. So they figured if we don't chop these forests down, then we're going to be in danger of being taken over by the Carthaginians.
Okay. So you're going on this point of these, that's where the guns come in, right? So you've established the civilization starts being able to have more human beings per square foot.
We're still working on the
square
steel
mile.
part of it.
Okay, still
the
on the
steel
steel.
part
Okay,
comes first.
go ahead.
The guns come later.
Okay.
You've got metallurgy, which started out with copper. People walking around and they see copper rocks with copper in them sitting on the surface, and you take these rocks and you put them next to the fire, and to build a fire around, and you
Copper
start to
melts.
notice this molten material, and they learned metallurgy from bringing the rocks closer to the fire.
Right.
And so they started to come up with different metals, and they mixed tin with copper to make bronze, and you get the Bronze Age.
Okay, I think there's an important thing you have to introduce here. Okay, so we've established that the crops were able to get more people together, and you established that there's a surplus. So when there's a surplus, now what you got going on is you have the ability for people to spend time doing other things than just collecting food.
Correct. Now,
Okay.
what happens is, and this is an interesting thing, this is where you get hierarchy and religion. All right? So for millennia, there are no buildings larger than, say, maybe 20 feet tall.
Okay.
But they come up with all of this grain, and they need a place to start storing the grain because it can't get wet, and they need to be able to defend it from the marauding hunter-gatherers that know about the grain, and they want to come in and take their food. So they start building these, and they turn into temples. It's a place to store the grain and to be able to protect it. And these buildings are huge, right? And so they start developing architecture. Now, imagine being a person who's never seen a building any bigger than 20 feet, and you come up, and now there's a building that's 50 feet tall.
Made out of plaster.
Correct. Made out of timbers and mud-baked bricks and plaster. And they start painting them, paint beautiful murals on them, and they carve animal structures. Have you guys heard of the, what's it called? I'll think of the name in a bit. It's in Eastern Turkey. No? I'll come up with it. Göbekli Tepe.
Okay.
Göbekli Tepe. It means potbelly. It refers to the shape of the mound of the hill where they found these
Got it.
formations.
Okay.
They found it back in the late 70s. If you look it up on the internet, it's amazing. There's about 12,000, 10,000 to 12,000 years old. And it was hunter-gatherer civilizations, but they started to build statues and carve these beautiful animals. And some of them were supernatural animals. Griffins, dragons, all sorts of different animals. And what they were trying to explain to their people in the society, they figured out, was this is the time when human beings thought that they had achieved an apotheosis of types. They were no longer part of the animal kingdom. They were now above it. They now dominated it because of animal husbandry. Now let's talk about that real fast. When you had the human diaspora from Africa, okay, all the people took off from Africa and started heading out all over the world. There were people that landed in Australia 60,000 years ago. The Papua New Guinea we already talked about. 15,000 years ago, people from Siberia came down through Alaska and started populating North and South America. And one of the first things that happened when they came into contact with the indigenous animal life was that the animal life didn't have any fear of the people. It didn't know what they looked like. It didn't register to them.
They weren't considered a known predator in their genes.
In Africa, the elephants had been dealing with Homo sapiens for hundreds of thousands of years, and they were scared shitless of them, right? So they knew about that. All the other animals as well. And in Eurasia, basically the same thing going on. But when they spread out from there, the mastodons, the mammoths, the giant sloths, all these animals were killed. They didn't have any animals left to be able to domesticate.
So this was like in North America and
North America, South America, basically the entire rest of the world that wasn't attached to Eurasia.
right.
Okay?
So if I may jump in real quick.
go
Okay.
ahead.
So here's the picture that Mike's painting here. So you've got central the Eurasia latitude, this long area with lots of opportunity to develop, to get all these different species of grains and rices, to have a surplus of food, to start building civilizations because you have a surplus of food and you have time to focus on other things than just hunting for your survival, so you can develop technologies.
We didn't talk about that part. That's right. That's a very important part. When you look at Eurasia, it's all aligned east to west.
Yes, this is the
could,
big thing.
You can pull up an image.
Okay.
Right here.
Oh, yes, great. Oh, yeah, this is exactly it. In North America, basically the corn came from Central America, right? But it was only able to exist in a really small latitudinal range. The same thing in Africa with the
Yams.
with the manioc and with the yams. They could only grow them in a small. It took thousands of years to develop agricultural products that were different from from what they were originally. Like the corn that they grew in Central America, it took them 5,000 years to develop a species of corn that would grow in New England. That's why there were no giant civilizations. Native American
that's the important part. That's the whole thing here. That's what
Correct.
all this is about. Is if you look at these lines here, you'll see that the latitude line of Eurasia is from a climate perspective is such a long range for biodiversity and for hybridization of wheats and rices and surplus building and civilization building. So when you have this abundant amount of food and diversity of species, you can build big civilizations. And if you look over in the longitude of South America, North America, Africa, okay, those longitude lines have such a diversity of climates. You can't have that diversity of foods.
You can't
and
have
grains
the same
and species and plants.
You can't have the same size populations. That's why there were so many people. Once you have more people and you have more brains, you're able to start coming up with different ways to develop your metallurgy and different technologies.
And now I want to comment on Mike's point there also is when he was talking about how these cultures came in down through North America and they ate all the land animals. Well, that's what they had to eat. They didn't have the ability to do all this very complicated agriculture like they were able to do in that long latitude over there. I'll pull that up again so you could see that.
The point that you have to remember is the question is, why did they have so much food? The reason is because of the grains that they had and the fact that they had horses on Eurasia, they had goats, they had pigs, they had chickens, they had sheep, and they had cows.
Okay.
Right? All of those animals didn't exist anymore anywhere else in the planet, and they were able to domesticate those animals. It talks in the book about how you can't domesticate zebras because they don't have the right genetic makeup. They're too individual, right?
Okay.
Horses, on the other hand, are hierarchical, and you're able
to integrate them into your pecking order, so to speak.
There's a mating pair, right? And they don't allow, like, same thing with wolves and dogs. That's why you can domesticate dogs, because dogs evidently are fine with being dominated. They're okay with it, evolutionarily speaking.
They can be integrated into a hierarchy that's human driven.
If there's a breeding pair that doesn't allow them to breed, they're okay with it. Other species aren't. The ones that are okay with this hierarchy You're able to take them as puppies, and they think that you're the dominant individual.
Yeah,
in
you're the
herd,
alpha male in the
and
herd,
they do
so to
whatever you
speak.
want.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
So the Spanish had goats and pigs and chickens in their boats, and they showed up with all this food and all this grain and stuff. Plus, they had the steel.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Horses.
They had steel swords. They had horses. They had guns. They had mounted cavalry. They had armor. And there's a.
And all of this is development that came from having the surplus of food and the ability to focus on other things than just fighting for your survival, and actually think and innovate and be creative and all that stuff because of the surplus of food.
I don't know if this book talks about it. It might have been the Sapiens, the one, the other one on the outside.
That's okay.
I will
That's
try
all
my
right.
best to remember, but there's one chapter, and it has to do with a fellow named Atahualpa, and he was the leader of the Incas when I think it was Pizarro. I might be getting these names
Yes,
wrong.
that was when Pizarro went and invaded the Incas.
Exactly. And so what was happening, a lot of people, the propaganda at the time, the Western people wanted you to believe, was that we showed up to an area, I say we, the Spanish showed up to an area that, and they were just so overwhelmingly better that they were able to, with 500 guys, take over an entire continent. And that's not exactly what happened. Not at all. When they showed up, there had been, like other places in all the world, they were dealing with a civil war in South America. This one family had split off and they were warring. Plus, all of these civilizations, the Incas, the Aztecs, the Maya, they would go out and they would murder and rape and steal the indigenous people from the area and enslave them, and they would use them in terrible human sacrifices.
Sounds like what happens all over the world.
Exactly right. Once they were able to come up with the food, and once they were and the political ability to take that food and create a hierarchy out of it, they started doing the same things that the Europeans did, but they didn't get a head start. The Europeans had a head start of about 2,000 years on it, so they had a little bit more political savvy. They had the guns. They had. And the germs, that's a really important part of it. Because they had cities that existed, and the germs come from the animals, right? That's where all of the current...
Yeah, that's why a lot of Europeans, they were able to, they didn't get sick as often because they had pigs, right? They had all these animals that...
Well, what happened was eventually... when you start living close to animals that live in herds, you start to contract their diseases. Let's not dwell on the fact that some of these, and this is in part of the book, and it actually occurs today. there was a guy, he got really super sick in, I think it was, I forget where it was, really remote part of China. But they went to the doctor. And he's, long story short, he admitted that
Quit sticking your pig.
he used to have sex with the sheep because his wife wasn't around, and his wife was there. She got pissed. It's actually pretty. She was like, oh, she was horrified, but that he got sick from hanging out, and you think, oh, that's gross, but yeah, but it has happened over thousands of years, and that's where you get diseases.
And that's where you get immunities.
Correct. That's cowpox became smallpox. You take the wild aurochs, these giant cows, turn them into ox over thousands of years. You breed them down in size, that get rid of the horns, but you're living so closely with them and milking them all the time, and they developed diseases that killed a lot of the people, but they got immunities. So now they've got smallpox, they've got yellow fever, they've got malaria, all these diseases that came about out of the jungles and were developed in civilizations. So they've got immunities to them, and they show up with these diseases, and they know all about them. And they start giving away blankets.
Oh, is this like the Native Americans getting the blankets with smallpox on it, like that whole thing?
This is bio warfare. This is germ warfare. That's been
Simple
going on.
germ warfare.
Yeah.
Simple on its simplest level.
And so they got rid of about 90% of the population of North and South America. And there's a quote that said, "Thus God has given us this land.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, he's gotten rid of the heathens, and he's given it to us because of providence.
How convenient.
Yes, and so when they came, to get back to Atahualpa, when they show up with their spears and their guns, they come in to the to this giant square area with these huge pyramids and stuff around it, and there's thousands of soldiers. But the soldiers they're armed with basically with clubs, and they don't have any armor. And there's maybe 50 Spanish conquistador soldiers, and they've got armor, and they've got spears, and they've got bullets. And they go in with these shields, and immediately when they see the king Atahualpa, they start killing everyone around him, and nobody knows what's going on. And they're just and I think it takes them most of the day, 12 or 13 hours, and they kill 5,000 or 6,000 people, and then they eventually just give up, right? And so they take over this small part of the empire, and then they're able to go out to the communities that have been oppressed by these civilizations, and they start getting armies together, right?
Yeah, so they gain influence.
They get thousands of soldiers, not just influence, but people to be able to go and attack.
They've influenced all the people to then
the other
join,
cities. They say,
join
we're
their-
here to liberate you, right? And these terrible Incas, they've been stealing your people and they've been murdering you. We've been sent by God, and we're going to give you back your lands. And
Crazy.
And so we're going to use you. So they use these basically the Indian tribes to help them take over the area, and then they stabbed them in the back and enslaved them, and started to force them all to dig silver mines. All of the silver that came out of South America was immediately minted into coins and sent on ships. It wasn't a lot of gold; it was almost all silver. They sent it over to Spain, and then there was a giant explosion of capitalism because of all this influx of cash. And that's where shit went haywire. They started coming up with everybody wanted to get in on it.
Yep, of course. And then it became the imperial, colonial, hostile, global takeover.
Exactly. And the reason it was able to happen is because of the shape of the world, roughly, and the fact that the climate changed 13,000 years ago and allowed the people that lived in Eurasia to develop metallurgy and animal husbandry and agriculture
Okay.
and politics.
Well, there you have it. And, and the nice thing about this whole book and this kind of basic description of the book and what it's trying to explain is that the whole concept, to me, of intelligence and who's more intelligent, who has a higher IQ globally, kind of goes out the window. And also because opportunity is a different scenario than intelligence.
Yep.
And there was a lot of opportunity there based on what you just described. And I also read that intelligence, recently I picked up an article, and intelligence is not necessarily, IQ is not necessarily a factor of your genes as it is where you're from, your environmental and social contributors, and your aptitude or desire to want to excel innately and do well on a test, for example. So I read this article in AAAS, and it's in the sciencemagazine.org, and it talked about how kids who score higher on IQ tests, they say, they're going to go on to have a better academic life and all this other stuff, and they've been debating what an IQ test actually tests. Okay, what does it actually test? And it went on to say that like the differences between ethnic groups, and saying that reflects differences in intelligence, and it has more to do with social and economic factors, like I was saying. So it was a heavy debate, and back in the 90s, and there was a lot of commentary that Africans and Americans and Hispanics were intelligently more inferior because Well, because of their ethnicity, but that had nothing to do with it.
They weren't the ones writing the tests, were they?
They weren't the ones writing the test, number one. Okay. And it also had a lot to do with the fact that if somebody is inspired to work hard at a test, they're going to test much better. If somebody's not inclined to work really hard on a test, they're probably not going to do well. And that goes across the board for all ethnicities. So anyways, and this article went on to just outline all these different reasons as to why you're getting intelligence quotients of different types in different regions. And most of what this article talks about is that how the environment in which you grow up in has way more to do with how you test in an IQ test than your genealogy.
That's the concept of the head start.
Yes.
When your family, when your mom and dad either went to college or did very well in high school, they have a higher vocabulary. When they're more literate, they have books, periodicals. You hear more words when you're growing up in I want to say white homes. You hear more words.
Let's say higher social class
in homes with a higher social class,
privilege,
with more privilege, exactly.
A little bit of
so the
maybe
kids,
a touch of affluency that contributes to the ability to have better access to learning and resources.
Maybe the mom didn't have to wake up at 4:00 in the morning and get on a bus and go clean somebody else's house, right?
Right.
Maybe she was privileged enough that her husband's job was enough to run the family, and she was able to stay home with her children and read to them, read them stories, talk to them more often. The kids that didn't have anyone saying any words to them had a smaller vocabulary. Let's check out this book and open a book of a bunch of animals. This is an orangutan. This is a giraffe. This is a wolf. Okay, and the kids are learning all that stuff. Maybe in some of the less privileged houses, they didn't have access to this materials, and they didn't hear about all these different animals when they were little kids. They didn't get to go to the zoo, right? I took an IQ test when I was 5 years old, back in the 70s. They did this to all the kids. And one of the main parts of it that I can remember is they asked you, okay, name every animal that pops into your head. You have 60 seconds to go. Boom, just like that. And you start, and you're a little kid, and you're a little afraid, and maybe you don't know very many animals. Me, I was animal crazy. And so I just started rattling. I did really well on these tests because my mom didn't work. You know, she sat around the house and helped us kids, and we learned stuff. So
that's a great little.
So my IQ was registered at 132 when I was 5 years old, and so one of the reasons that
and now your IQ is 82.
I have no idea what it is. It can't be anywhere near what it used to be. It's been
chipped away.
Degraded.
It's like my
Correct.
IQ is 7.6.
Yeah, exactly. My IQ is belching beaver.
So that explains why I'm not good at math and I just want to landscape all day.
Right.
One of the many reasons.
See, dude, it's in your. Hey, bro, it's in your genes. You're gonna be a landscaper.
Fucking paint houses, landscape. Lay down fucking pipe all fucking day.
Oh my god, dude, that's so rad. So
I do agree with that though.
No. There's
when
a
you're
lot of
exposed
truth to
to
that,
a
and
lot
I mean the
more.
article went into great detail about how the misconceptions about ethnicity and intelligence, and that's why I wanted you to come in and talk about this book, is because that book just clearly outlines how opportunity and how luck and your environment that you're in plays a huge role in your success.
Yep, exactly right. And one of the reasons that I started reading when I was a kid was because I had a lot of questions, and you get a lot of answers, but many of them are counterintuitive, right? You get the concept that they call, oh gosh, I'm gonna forget it again. Let me see if I can remember this. It'll come to me.
You think about that for a second.
I will think about it. But I had questions that the answers that were given to me didn't make any sense.
Sure.
They dragged me to church when I was a little kid, and I was told that there was a reason that everything existed. The answer to that was there was a God, and this God was the answer to all your questions. Why is this? It's because it's God. But what about this? God is God's purpose, it's God's plan, it's God's reason. And it never made it. Who is this God person? Well, he controls the universe. He created the universe, and he watches over all of us.
Sounds kind of fishy to me.
It didn't make much sense to me.
Well, how do you feel about it now?
Well, it took many decades of studying it to try and come up with who was right and who was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember the moment that I stopped becoming an agnostic. The moment that I became what I thought was an agnostic was I read a book by Robert A. Heinlein called Stranger in a Strange Land. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah.
It was a super popular book back when it was written in the late 60s, early 70s. And I read that, and Robert A. Heinlein was an atheist.
Okay.
And I was convinced because of his arguments in that book that I was also an atheist, but I didn't really have enough information and enough knowledge to feel confident in an argument with somebody who knew more, say a Karen Armstrong, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I started reading all these books and trying to come up with an explanation of why there are so many different religions, why people believe in these religions, and the rough reason that Heinlein gave for why none of this makes any sense is because there's a million different religions and they're all opposed to each other, right? You can't have a million different religions all be right, but you can have a million different religions all be wrong,
Right.
Yeah.
right?
What's that chart you got up there?
Oh, it's just showing the size of Africa,
Oh, lovely.
the true size.
Well, let's take a look.
Oh, that's a good
I just
question.
thought it was interesting because you know how the book did bring up that everything originated from Africa,
It did.
humans and everything,
Yep.
and there are a lot of non-believers. But how could it not? Look how fucking big it is.
Mm-hmm.
Back when Pangea was around, imagine. It's got to be the main hub.
Okay,
Yep.
look at that. The United States fits in there. France,
China,
Spain, China.
Jesus Christ, and the only real
Cheese
like
and rice.
fertile areas of this place is like
South Africa.
the Cape, South Africa, and a little bit of like the eastern side.
They say
Just
fertile.
barely.
It has to do with the climate. The Mediterranean climate
Yep.
is down here, the same as it is up here, and also off the coast of California.
But in the middle, it's either desert or dense forest that can't be penetrated.
Yeah.
Yep.
Crazy, right? Sounds like an opportunity
An
for the
opportunity
southern
to not be
and
successful.
the right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, there you go.
I was gonna finish the thing about.
Go ahead,
I
finish
remember
your thing.
I started about the. That was one of the reasons that I
A
wanted
million
to
religions that are wrong.
start reading all these books
Okay.
was to come up with an explanation as to why so many people believed in what was obvious to me, something that was untrue. And I still to this day have difficulty coming up with an explanation
Okay.
that is sufficient, because it's so obvious to me. The explanation that I've come up with is it's what they want to believe. That's it. It's what they want.
I want to believe.
Yes, it's what
I want to believe.
it's what I choose to believe.
So I shall believe it.
Free will.
Free will doesn't exist.
Free Willy?
Free Willy.
Free will definitely does exist. But I was referring to the buildings and the
The mounds.
the use of magic and illusion to create these religions. Now, originally you had these buildings that were built to control the grain, and
Oh yeah, back to that. Okay, cool.
that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, go.
We've got the giant buildings that were grown up, and people come in from all over. These hunter-gatherers come in, and they see these huge buildings. Now there's people praying to the buildings. What's going on with that? When the buildings,
I don't know.
When the buildings started to get constructed, they needed to have a class of people who could keep track of the grain, store it. That was going to be their job. You had the farmers who were out growing the grain, but then you had to have somebody go out, and you needed mathematics, and you needed writing to be able to figure out this farm over here owes us this much because they're paying in taxes. That's where you develop the class of individuals who started to consider themselves more important than the farmers. Now, analyze this for a second. Why would you think that you're more important than the dirty farmers out digging in the cow shit, growing the food? You don't have to, you were born into this, and you dress in clothes. You don't have to dig in the crap. And your job is to count the wheat and to make sure that all the taxes, and also to get soldiers to make sure that the people give up their crops, which they might not want to do. Right?
So are you talking about the formation of the central banking system?
That's exactly right. These are the people that came up with numbers, and they came up with alphabets, and they came up with basically the first form of computers were these cuneiform tablets.
Yeah, cuneiform tablets. I remember those.
And they found
abacus.
The abacus, that was part of it, but they had these giant storehouses with all these tablets, and they were basically records of who owns what plot of land, and who owns a certain amount of corn. Now, these people started to think to themselves, if some of these farmers, God forbid, die over here, it doesn't really mean anything to our civilization, because we've got all these farmers over here to get crops from. However, if we die, the entire civilization collapses, because we're the ones that control the grain, and we're bringing in all of this stuff, and we're the government, so we're more important. So they started seeing themselves as indispensable, and the people around them as serfs. And this, over a period of several thousands of years, that developed into the religions, and they started saying, hey, you guys need to worship this structure. And it no longer became a storehouse of grain, it became a temple,
A place of worship.
and the gods that lived in the area, the grains that you brought in, and if you analyze the earliest religions, they basically said that it's your job to grow this grain and bring it in and give it to this point, because, and this is also in these books, because their original religions said that basically the gods existed on the planet, and they started to dig rivers, and they had to create mountains, right? The gods had to create the planet. But they got tired of doing all of this because it was too much work. And so they developed lesser gods, right? Sort of almost demigods. And they got the demigods, the lesser gods, to dig the rivers and to do all the work, making the seas, the tides and the waves and all this stuff, right? So, excuse me. One day, the lesser gods got pissed off, and they started a revolt. And they said, we're not going to work this hard anymore. You're killing us. It's not fair. And we're going on strike. And so the gods said, okay, I know what we're going to do. We're going to create the humans. And the humans are going to do the job that you lesser gods used to do. And we have to set up this human society exactly the same way that the celestial society runs. So there has to be a hierarchy. And if there's no hierarchy, then the gods are going to get mad, and they're not going to bring the rains, and they're not going to allow you to have your crops. So the people would come, and they would say, and they would teach them this. And they would say, well, why do we have to bring you the grains? Well, because the gods, and that's where the religion came from. Religion comes from a hierarchy trying to explain to unlearned peasants that they have to give up at least half their stuff.
So it's just manipulation.
Yes. And that was the answer to my question. Where do religions come from? Religions come from what I just explained.
Crazy.
Can you explain that again?
No.
Hey,
When you look at...
do you have any more charts? Hey, hold on.
Oh,
Do
go ahead.
you have any more charts you wanted to bring up?
No.
That kind of... What's that one you got right there? That's kind of cool.
This one shows the continental axis hypothesis.
Yeah, well, there it is. So
Kind
it's
of the same thing.
so
that we
this
saw.
the continental axis hypothesis is kind of all over the place.
I hadn't seen this. This is interesting.
It's similar, but it talks about horses and llamas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, basically
Where they have it.
what Jared Diamond wrote about. Well, you know what? I think the big thing about this book that I really like is the fact that we are, kind of there's evidence and information that kind of combats this whole Eurocentric mindset.
Yep. You know what a
Basically.
llama is?
Your mama?
Good answer. I didn't know this before I read the book.
Oh, okay.
A llama is a domesticated guanaco.
Oh, okay.
A cow is a domesticated aurochs, right? There are all these precursor animals.
Yeah.
The aurochs used to be this huge, giant, wild cow that lived in Eurasia.
Crazy.
The Nazis used to worship them. The last aurochs used to be around 400 years ago in some of the hills of Germany. And they went extinct.
Imagine why. I wonder why.
Hitler actually tried to bring them back.
To put them in their UFO.
They tried.
Yeah, put it in their UFO and shut it back off. And
They
just-
tried to mate buffalo with oxen to try and get the aurochs
Nice
back.
try. Hey, Jorge, did you have a chum tonight?
We kind of touched on it.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Unless you want to bring it up.
What's this?
It's all right. We don't have to.
A
Well-
chum is a segment that we have where we just rip on our guest.
Oh no!
Just kidding.
Let's
No,
not do
man,
that.
we're not. We're gonna leave you
Just
alone.
kidding.
Let's not do that.
Do you want to bring the chum up?
Well, we kind of touched on it, but it was regarding the IQ and how whites were seen.
Okay,
we
that
touched on it.
that sounds like some chum. We got to get
Okay.
gnarly on this. Are you guys ready to get gnarly in this?
Okay.
Okay. Hold on just a second. Let's go into Chumland.
I like it.
Oh my God!
Wow, look at that. We're so red.
What do you have to say?
I like it.
Tell me about this whole
Oh,
race
well,
thing,
you
dude.
start-
come on,
you
come on, man.
Well, you started off.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
start it off. Okay,
Talk about what Vince said.
okay. Vince was trying to say that Africans were inferior intellectually, based on some studies that he pulled up in his book or his little research
Graph that he got
done.
from
his graphic.
Fox
Okay,
News.
He sounds like a great guy.
He is a great guy.
he actually is a great guy, but I think he makes a lot of deductive reasonings from bits and pieces of this, that, and the other.
Yeah, but he even stated that it was white people that created all the Mayan temples, then left, and then those same temples were occupied by.
What? the fuck are you talking about?
I didn't know
No,
that.
I'm kidding.
Gotta be kidding me. No, come on. No, seriously though, this whole concept of intellectual superiority among the races, I tell you what, I just don't see it, especially after seeing this book,
Yeah, when you read this book, it really shows
Oh.
you everybody's pretty intelligent, especially when it comes to certain things, right?
Right.
Just some people are just more.
Well,
you know.
what's the
I
aptitude you're
can't
testing
tell
for
you.
in the end?
I cannot tell you how relieved I was after I finished this book.
Good. Tell the people how
it
fucked
answered-
up racism is.
it
Okay, tell
answered-
them how fucked up it is.
It answered pretty much every question I ever had. The last 4 or 5 books that I've read over the last few years answered all the questions that used to bug me when I was a kid about religion and the constituency of the planet and hierarchy. The history of why hierarchies exist. I wanted to know all of that. And it's very difficult to get a straight answer from somebody who doesn't have an agenda,
Yeah.
right? The people like Jared Diamond, he's got no agenda. That's a good point. I watched a video, it was actually a film, when I was 18, I guess I was 19 at PCC, only college I ever went to, Pasadena City College. And I took an anthropology class, got an A. Thanks very much.
You're
Well,
welcome.
with an IQ of 130.
Well,
Oh,
you,
yeah,
you,
right?
you really
Come
are.
on.
I'm 132.
No,
but
82.
Oh, 132.
Who's counting?
No, 7 point.
7 points.
That was
That's
right.
my fucking joke.
we
damn
watched a film about the difference between evolutionism and creationism.
Ooh.
And it was really, this is what I was dialed in to learn about.
We have an episode.
It's why I
Yes, we do.
It's why I took the class. It's really what I wanted to learn about. And what they did was they had this molecular biologist, geneticist from MIT, and they interviewed him over here. And then they had this other guy, and he was the head of a religious college in the South, and they interviewed him. And they interviewed the religious guy, and they said, well, the scientific guy over here says that humans have a specific genetic code, and it's able to analyze this genetic code, and it says that we are far closer, genetically speaking, to chimpanzees than we are to, what was the fish he used? What's the sucker fish? The lamprey eel.
Okay.
He said, we're closer to chimpanzees than we are to lamprey eels. And I'm watching the thing, and I'm like, okay, go. And then they showed the guy, and he said, well, this other guy, he said, if you look at some parts of the genetic code, we're closer to chimpanzees. But if you look at other parts of the genetic code, then we're actually more similar to lamprey eels.
So the moral of the story is?
Then they clicked back to the biologist guy, and they told him what he did. They showed him that footage, and he laughed. And I remember the exact quote that he gave. He said, I forget the guy's name, I will give say his name is Farmer, I will give Mr. Farmer every worldly possession that I own, which is a 1968 Volkswagen bus and half a house, if he could show me one tiny little example of where a lamprey eel is more genetically similar to a human being than a chimpanzee is. Okay? And that was a point scored as far as I was concerned. Later on in the argument, he said to the scientific guy, he said, is there any knowledge or information that you can glean from anywhere that will allow you to change your worldview? And the scientific guy goes, absolutely. He says, what's that? He says, well, that's just scientific information. If we get new facts in, if we get new science in, then I'm able to scrub everything that I used to believe, and I'm able to latch on to this new information because it makes more sense. It's no longer a hypothesis that we're just dealing with. It's got more facts to support
Factual validity.
Exactly. And so all I need is new evidence to
right.
change my worldview. And then they switch over to the head of the church, and they say, okay, here's the question we asked this scientific guy. What is the information that you need to hear that will change your worldview? And he said, nothing. I will never change my worldview. There is no knowledge that you could tell me. There is no fact that will allow me to no longer believe in God. My view is solid, and it is impermeable, and it is unchanging.
Well, and there you have it. You know, there's some people whose minds you just cannot change no matter how hard you try, and that is very unfortunate.
I saw that example, and I immediately decided that I wanted to have nothing to do with somebody whose ideas will always be fixed, and there is no knowledge that you can impart to them that will make them change their mind. The other guy, his mind was open.
Yep.
And I thought and I was 18 when I saw this film, and I decided to go on
To migrate there.
on a different path.
And there you go. And that's, and that, if there's anything I want you guys to take away from this, chum, that's it. Have an open mind. Don't believe everything you read. be open to new ideas.
Unless there's supporting evidence.
Yeah, well, of course, supporting evidence is very important. All right, you guys, thanks very much for hanging out for that little chum right there. Well, Mike, I want to say thank you for coming in and talking about Jared's book.
Oh, well, I had a great time.
Dude, we had a great time
Had a
too.
great time.
That was like Mr. Information right there. Here, watch out for Mike. This guy, dude, he'll talk for
Mr.
like the next
132.
8 hours.
That's me.
8 hours.
Mr. 7.9.
7.9. little shout out to the Belching Beaver.
This is lovely beer.
Okay, it's a lovely beer. Phantom Bride, Deftones Phantom Bride. I love this beer. It's a good one. And hey, put that book away.
I'm going to leave those books. You need to read those books.
Want to say thanks to Mike for coming in tonight. Mike, thanks so much for coming in talking about that book.
You're welcome.
If there's anything I want anybody to take away from the book, it's, hey, there's so much evidence out there that differentiates all the opinions out there that can say, hey, hold on a second. You know what? Do you really think you know what's going on? You really think you have a clear picture of what's going on? Is it really about race? Is there really different levels of people out there? Yeah, and it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with your opportunities in life, your privileges. It has to do with individuals that strive to be better and be better people. And that I'll bank on.
One of the ways that you could do that, as far as I'm concerned, is to read more books.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, educate yourself. All right, you guys. Hey, if you like what you heard tonight, go ahead and, give a little like there. Please subscribe. We got all kinds of interesting topics. And I'd like to say that tonight's podcast showed an opposite side of a lot of the stuff that we've had on in recent episodes.
I know, not once did we bring up aliens, other than UFO.
I know, it's crazy.
I just recently learned that there are aliens.
No, just recently? Come on, man.
Well, yeah. Have you heard recent news on the TV?
Okay, we'll talk about that more
It's
next time.
crazy. Well, next time.
All right. You guys, thanks for tuning in to Mike on a Platter. Mike Dahlgren, thanks for coming in and talking about
Anytime.
Yes, Mike, thank you
I'll
very
come
much.
back anytime.
Guns, Germs, and Steel
I
by
had the
Jared
best time.
Diamond, even though Jared Diamond never got back to us, even though I tried to reach out to him.
Did
but
you
that's
really?
okay. Yes, I did. But that's okay. That's all right. You came in on his behalf. So there you go.
Jared,
Excellent book. Thank you.
I hope you don't see this and get mad at what I said. I was trying my best to to explain all of the things that you taught me to other people.
Next time we'll talk about hot dogs, burgers, and fries.
Okay, sounds good. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.